Hey guys, what is up? Welcome back. We're going to be working on our Super Mario neural network. I just want to say I'm really excited. I just hit over 400 subs and I know this is a small new channel. I'm excited about that. So thank you to all of you guys who are subscribed. I really do appreciate it. And I also want to say thank you so much to all the people who send me nice comments. I do read them all. I try to respond to them all. So thanks guys, I really appreciate it. That's why I'm doing this. When I get this feedback, it really excites me and I want to, keep going with this content. So thanks so much for all those nice words. Now let's get into today's content. So you should be where I'm at. If you're not, take a jump back, get your pictures extracted from your data, which I explained in the last video. I have about, 112 images. You don't need to have that many. You could probably get away with doing this with even 20 or 30 images, but I just have about 112. I get some nice variation here. Now, what we're going to do is we're about to launch the Label Studio and actually start labeling our images. That is going to tell the system, tell the AI where in the image the objects are, and we'll get into that in a minute. But what I want you to realize is when we look at these pictures, all of these still images, each of these is a scene with different things in them, and we can label whatever we want. We're going to actually create our labels in a few minutes that we're going to be teaching the AI, and you can decide what you want to make a label. So for example, Mario could be a label. We may want to differentiate Big Mario and Small Mario as two different labels. We could even label things like the cloud that actually don't affect the gameplay technically, but anything on the screen, we can decide how we want to label that. So as we go through these images, you're going to think about how you would want to label this. Maybe we have an object that's a pipe, maybe we have Mario, maybe we have bricks, maybe we have the blocks. So think about that as we go through the images. Now we're going to move over to Label Studio. Okay, so go ahead and start Label Studio on a Linux machine. It's going to be Label Studio Start. This is going to start the Django web application essentially, and this will spawn a website. In my case, it's at port 8080. It's going to open that up, and you're going to see a web application. It looks like a website. Again, this is a web server, web application, I should say, that's being hosted on your own computer. So this is like an internal website that only you have access to. It's being served over your local host, which is your own machine, on port 8080. So don't worry, this is not a web application. We're not going to be uploading images anywhere. It's all going to be on your machine. Now the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a project. I'm going to call this Mario AI. You can give a description if you want. Okay, for the data import, now you might be tempted to just drag and drop all of your files here, but don't do that just yet. I'm going to teach you how to create a cloud storage. Now we're not going to be using like a Google Cloud or anything like that. You could actually use, Dropbox or something like that, but we're actually going to create a cloud storage on our own machine so that the folder that all of those images are in, this application is going to have access to that folder as if it was like a cloud. So it's a lot easier than just trying to upload all those files and manipulating them. It's going to be like having our own connection to that folder, almost like a database connection. So don't feel the need to import any data just yet. And then the next page, we have what's called labeling setup. Now we can adjust this later, but let me just explain. There are different ways of doing this type of machine learning. So there are different ways of labeling images. We could label them as polygons. We could label them as different things. We are going to be using bounding boxes. So we're going to essentially be putting bounding boxes around things on an image. We're not going to be looking at audio. We're not going to be doing audio. We're not going to be doing anything like that. Now you can look at this. There's a lot of different templates, and it's really interesting. You can look at the different types of things. They have natural language processing, which is really neat. That's really popular now with like ChatGPT and all that kind of stuff. But we are interested in image processing. Now you could do video processing as well. They have this vision object tracking. That's kind of a bounding box with video. I'm going to be using images. I'm not going to be using video file for this tutorial. So we're going to be using the computer vision section, and you're going to find object detection with bounding boxes. This is going to take images and it's going to find objects in a bounding box. Okay, that's the type of work that we're going to be doing on this project. So click that. Now that's going to come with a default, almost like a sample for you to understand what's going on. And you can see that this has two labels. Now you can think of a label as an object in the scene that you're trying to detect. In this case, it's set up to detect airplanes and cars. And you can see they have an image here, and green boxes, if we were to label this, we would be putting airplanes in green boxes and cars in blue boxes. Now we don't want those labels because we're not doing airplanes and cars. But this is just kind of an example of how a default setup might be. Okay, so if you look to the right, you're going to see what's kind of a preview of how you're going to actually be doing the labeling in a couple of minutes. And we actually have some options here that we can change. So if I add allow image zooming with the control wheel, you're not going to see a change here, but that's going to allow us to zoom in and out of the image. That's very handy when you're trying to get accurate bounding boxes. I would recommend checking that. You're also going to see show control, zoom in and out. And you'll notice if I click that, it's going to enable some additional controls over here. This is kind of, again, this is kind of a preview of how your UI is going to look when we actually go to labeling. We're actually setting up the UI environment for how we want to do our labeling. I pretty much turn most of this stuff on, so show controls to rotate. Now for our Mario game, because everything is pretty much going to be the same in a Mario game, you don't have like really rotations in an NES game like that, or at least in that NES game. We probably won't use that, but you can imagine like if this was an airplane, like in this example, the airplanes are in different angles. The bounding boxes, you know, they might, it might make sense to use a rotation, but we're not going to. This is just a, you know, an option where you want the label name to be. I'll just leave it at the bottom, and then add a filter. That's convenient. You'll see that'll add a filter here, so we can filter. Again, we're just adding some options to make our life easier. Okay, so now we're going to add labels. Remember, labels are the objects that we want to detect. So let's go back to our Super Mario Brothers image, and let's think about what are the things that we want to detect here. So I'm not going to detect everything. I'm not going to do clouds. Now you could. It's going to be more work, and I'm just going to focus on the things that actually are going to affect gameplay. So first, let's talk about Mario. I'm actually going to do 3 classes, maybe 4 classes for Mario. We're going to do Mario Small, because I want to differentiate whether Mario looks big or small on the screen. Now, you could get away with just doing one Mario and have all the different types of Marios called a Mario, but I actually want my AI to be like a player and be like, oh yeah, Mario has firepower right now. Mario is small right now, because that's going to affect the gameplay. So let's do Mario Small, Mario Big. Let's do Mario Star. That's when he has the invincibility star. And maybe we'll do Mario Fire. So that's our Fire Mario. So that's going to cover us with all the different types of Marios that we're going to see. We're going to have Goombas, so I'm going to call that the Goomba. We're going to have question blocks, so I'm going to call that a question dash block. We're going to have bricks. These are like the breakable brick blocks. I'm going to call those brick block. And if there's anything else in here, no. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to have something for the ground. This is going to be basically any ground that we can walk on, because again, that's going to be important to know. So I'm just going to call this ground. Okay, let's look at some other images, because there's going to be some other stuff that we're going to want to detect in our game. Like here, we're going to have the pipe, so we're going to want to detect pipes. So I'll just call this pipe. I'm going to call this a block. That's going to be like a generic block, basically a block you can walk on, bump, but you can't really do anything with, like break it or a question block or anything, or brick block. So I'm going to call that a generic block, basically a block that you can't really interact with. And again, you don't have to use my classes, guys. You can do this in a way that you think is better or makes more sense. We've already got Mario, so we're going to have to detect the mushroom and the flower. That's our power-ups. So we're going to do mushroom. I'm going to do fire, let's call it the fire flower, and then we have the star. That's the star power-ups, of course. There's a turtle in this first level. We'll do the turtle, and let's see what other objects we want to get. Maybe we can do I'm going to label these as blocks, because again, these are similar. It's a different type of block, but you can't really do anything with it except walk on it, so I'm going to call that a block. We don't really need, we can track coins and stuff, but I'm not going to do that just because, you know, it's not really something we need to interact with. I guess the last thing we could do is maybe flagpole and castle, just for fun. Let's do that. We'll do flagpole and castle. So those are all of our labels. I'm going to hit add. So we have 16 different objects that we're going to be looking for. Now keep in mind, not every picture is going to have every one of these objects, but when it does, we're going to want to label it accordingly. So go ahead and hit save, and this is going to basically start our project, if you will. And it's going to say you don't have any data yet, which is true. We don't have any data yet. So now we're going to have to link our data that's in our folder and almost use that as a cloud storage for our project. So let's look at how to do that next. Okay, next we're going to use the feature for syncing data from external storage. Now it's called external storage because it's compatible with Amazon and Google, etc. But we're actually going to use the local storage as our external storage, if you will. And if you go to this guide here on Label Studio IO Guide Storage, you can click on the local storage. And there's a really important step that I don't want you to miss. We have to set two system variables to certain values, or else this is not going to work. Label Studio won't be able to find your data set. You're going to want to set these two variables exactly as they're shown here. So let me explain. The first one is Label Studio local file serving enabled. So we want to tell it yes to enable it by setting that to true. That's going to be the same for every operating system, Mac, Linux, Windows, whatever. The second one is we want to set the root directory of where we want to give access to Label Studio to look for these files. And on a Linux or a Unix system like Mac or Linux, you're going to do the /home/user/ whatever folder your data is in. Now if you're on Windows, be careful, make sure you follow this one here where you're going to do root is C:// whatever, and you're going to give a folder. So you can create a folder just for this, just for hosting this data, if you will, and make sure you set these system variables both on a Windows machine or a Linux machine. Set the system variables to the correct value. If you don't do this, it will not work. Okay, let's go back to Label Studio now. Okay, so back in Label Studio, here we are. We don't have any data. We're going to click on the Settings tab up here. And this is going to be our project settings, and we're going to click on cloud storage. This is where we want to enable cloud storage. And there's going to be two buttons, add a source and add a target. So the source is going to be the data we're going to be pulling into Label Studio, and the target is the data we're going to be pushing our output to. And we can set them both to the same folder. So in my case, I created a folder called Home Frank Datasets. This is my root. I have this set up so every time I run my system, it'll set this variable. You need to choose the folder that you're working with. So we're going to want to make sure that all of our data is in that folder. So I'm going to actually copy all these pictures because they're not in the correct folder. I'm going to go to Home, and I'm going to go to my Datasets folder, and I'm going to delete this stuff here, and I'm going to create a new folder. Now you can have subfolders in there. I'm going to call this my frames, and I'm going to put all my pictures in there. Alternatively, you can just set that variable to whatever folder you're already working with. I'm just not going to mess with my system. So I've got all my folders in the folder that my system variable, or a subfolder actually, that my system variable is set to. So that's going to work. So let's go back. And let's add that data as a source. Now we're going to choose the storage type. We're not going to work with Amazon or Google. We're going to work with local files. And we're going to give it a title. So I'm just going to call this Mario frames, whatever, it doesn't matter. And this is where I'm going to give it the absolute path to the actual folder that I want to get the data from. So in my case, it's going to be this path right here, Home Frank Datasets frames. In your case, it will be probably something different. And this is where we can also use a regex expression to filter our data. So for example, if you had copied a whole bunch of junk and put it in this folder, and you had text files and image files, and you wanted to just tell it to take the images out of that folder, you could use a regex. The easiest thing is just don't mix up all the data, and you won't have to worry about that. And we want to treat every item in that folder as a source file. So again, the easiest way is just to make sure that that folder is clean, put all of your data into that folder, and make sure everything here is source data that we want to pull in. Turn that on. Now we're going to click Check Connection. This is going to basically check to see can Label Studio connect to that source. Successfully connected. If you don't see successfully connected here, check this path. Make sure you have the exact path. If you're on Windows, you're going to have a different looking path. You're going to have a C:/something something. Don't use my path. You have to use your path. And again, very, very important, if your system variables are not set, this will not work because it cannot see that data. So make sure that you do that. Check, it looks good. Now we're going to click Add. Okay, now it's going to give me the option to sync this. Basically, it's going to treat it like a cloud storage. If I click Sync, it's going to start syncing to this web application database. I'm going to click Sync. There it goes. So it has synced and it found 112 images, 112 new images. That looks good. That makes sense. So that means my data now in my web application is synced to that folder. It's just like a cloud storage. Now let's do the target because we want to set the target as well. And I'm going to do add target. Again, I'm not going to choose a Amazon or anything. We're going to do local files. We're going to call this, let's call this Mario output. You can give it the name that you think makes sense. And I'm going to use the same folder, except I'm going to call this the output folder. I'm going to create a folder here called output, and I'm going to use this absolute path. Again, check that connection, make sure it finds that connection. Click add storage, click sync storage. We have no data yet, so that makes sense, so there should be no data. And there you go. We have now created cloud storage hosted on our own computer that is also running a self-hosted web application. So great job if you've gotten this far. We are now ready to actually start doing the hard work of annotating our data. Okay, so we've got one small bug. I just realized you'll notice that these images are not loading, and we need to slightly adjust our path here. I'm not sure if this will affect Windows or not, but it will affect the Unix systems. So go to Edit, remove this extra backslash here, so you should have the name of the folder, no backslash. Save that for both your target and your source. Save, resync those, and go back to General Projects. And you should see your images now in each of those. Now if you don't, make sure that you also have the image variable set up. So let me just show you how to do that. If you go to your labeling interface, make sure that you have use image from manual, and then it's going to be $image. That's going to basically be the path of the image file. So that's kind of a default setting that we want to have set up. So as long as you have those two things set up, you should see the image now. And you can see each of these has Mario, has a picture of Mario or whatever image you're using. So we are ready to go. We're ready to start annotating now. So we're going to start our annotation in the next video because that's going to take a little bit more time. This is already a pretty long video. But if you've gotten this set up, you are now ready to do our annotation for our machine learning. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.